Hey Staten Island, this is Healthwish, a conversation about the state of healthcare in the fabulous 5th borough. Our aim is to raise issues, raise awareness, and raise health. Because when we raise health, we raise everyone. Today, from the Craft House in Killsborough Brew Pub, we're with Staten Island University Hospital's Chair of Emergency Medicine, Dr. Nicole Berwald. We asked Dr. Berwald how the ED was transformed to cope with COVID. Give a listen.
Hello and welcome, Dr. Berwald.
No, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Naturally, the emergency department, COVID, right? You guys are right there in the thick of it. What was it like as it started to pick up? And then what did you do to kind of make it easier for us to handle the increased load?
You know, when I think back, and it's funny sometimes to think back to the beginning of when we started to deal with the COVID pandemic, but I think the early things were to keep people abreast of whatever information we had and have even enhanced communication plans from what we always had. And I think our department was always relatively good at communicating, but we really sort of elevated the communication. And that's where people felt comfort. They knew that anything we knew as the administration, we were bringing that to the physicians and the nursing staff and made ourselves completely accessible, be physically or through an electronic meeting or through a phone call. You know, I myself, when we started, we had a daily communication that went out. And at one point when things sort of got a little more even and we were in a groove, I wrote to our staff, I don't want to clog your email boxes. I'm going to slow back these administrative updates. And they said, no, we look forward to it. We know when you're going to send it. We know around 10 p.m. is when we're going to get that next email. And they wanted it. It helped them feel connected. It helped them feel safe. It was like almost a small security blanket to get that information daily. So we didn't dial them back. But we also had set times on, depending if it was daily, biweekly, weekly, depending on what the need was at that time, a question and answer session from someone from our administration. You could just dial in, get any more recent updates, as well as someone to actually bounce things off of. And we were physically there with everyone. Even if I wasn't seeing patients, I was in the space with them 7 days a week. Right. At some point of the day, there was someone who represented our administrative team there with the people who are taking care of patients. Again, rounding not just with the physicians, but with everyone, making sure there was a unified and connected message. Because it takes a village. And if any moment in time it took a village, it was when we were seeing that and seeing it for the first time as a new thing. Right. No, I think that we were a very strong team during that. And I think that the sentiment lingers. And I also think if we have to manage more COVID patients in the future, we have a really successful framework.
Speaking to that framework, I do understand that there was some restructuring, reorganizing of the emergency department. Was it both procedurally and the physical space, or one more of one and not the other?
So I think what we're talking about is what I always think of as our hot and cold zones in the emergency department. Hot being we're concerned you might have COVID, and really a communicable disease at this point, and cold being otherwise. So it is structure and process, but we relied on sort of our natural geography in both emergency departments to create a floor plan that would work to create the process around our hot and cold zones, where we could divert patients to a care area that would separate someone who we believed was at risk for COVID from someone who wasn't. And then within those spaces, contain patients in isolation in case we got it wrong, right? So if you think, I think these 5 patients might have COVID, I don't know which one does, someone might not, let's keep them safe from the others. So juggling around the space, using sort of our natural geography to do that, because both spaces have breaks where you can, let's say, go left or right. And how do you take that space and incorporate it in? We shifted the space around. We need X percentage of beds to be used in this way. And now we need to dial that back further. We need to dial it up further while we sort of forecast where we are. And I think we've learned this. If it's not COVID, it could be something else. We didn't expect this. So let's be a little smarter and have plans that are flexible to manage a lot of different situations, be it impacting a small group of our population or a large group. And this has been interesting but really an opportunity to rethink the way we need to take care of our community and what is possible, because it makes you feel like anything is possible.
Yeah. And I think the point that you just made as far as plans go, knowing that there are known unknowns, the simple fact that this might play out in ways that we can't necessarily predict, but can at least over prepare for, is a good thing. And I think it's something that I like hearing my local healthcare providers tell me, because it sounds as though they're sort of prepared for anything.
I'll even say what we had to plan wasn't based on nothing. We did have plans for this, but there's subtle nuances, be it the volume of patients, the exact type, but we had building blocks in place that we then just had to mature that plan for. Also know that we do have things in stages for development for different things that come about, but this really allowed us to flesh things out in a way that I think the types of plans we have now would translate to a lot of different scenarios. And it's not pigeonholed that I'd use this for something like COVID, where you would just say, does this translate into this plan that we've had to use? Does it translate into that plan we've had to use? And it just creates another thing in our arsenal while we wait to see what's going to happen in this world.
Now, flu season is coming, and naturally our EDs do see an increased volume when flu season does come. What are the challenges, or maybe even some of the pros of having dealt with COVID now and flu season coming up, and what does that landscape look like?
You know, I'm going to make a comment that comes totally outside of my doctor role, just as a human being walking on the planet role. And you guys can agree or disagree. But I think in general, the way we handled ourselves as citizens related to us having a viral syndrome of any kind, be it flu, run-of-the-mill cold, or whatever it was maybe not the best prior to living through this, where you might go to work feeling sick. You might have accidentally infected your coworker. Your kid might have played with someone else's kid, and things that I don't think people would dream about doing now, right? So I think it gave perspective. When is it okay to say, I have to be out for a minute? So I think that's a wonderful lesson learned. I think related to patients coming into the emergency department, I think we have tracks, like I was saying. This might be a potential person. They might have COVID. They might also have the flu. But we still don't want to give the flu to the person who might have COVID, and COVID to the person who might have flu, which is where a lot of that planning comes in. You know, the day-to-day practices of better hand hygiene, staying away from people when you might be ill, wearing a mask is going to prove very useful in viral seasons. You know, flu, RSV, the other kinds of things we see in the winter. All of these measures we're taking now are going to prove to be helpful.
It almost took COVID to have people start taking those precautions during viral seasons, right? Because nobody was really, if it was a general flu season before COVID, nobody's wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Right?
With that, I would still say this. I mean, I'm a proponent of vaccinations. And I think despite the fact that people are going to be wearing masks and having these other improved behaviors, I would still advocate for everyone who it's safe to get a flu shot would get a flu shot for a couple of reasons. We want to keep people well. It might complicate the picture of what someone has in this moment, where you can prevent some of those flu cases, and we know that, and that would be beneficial. And it potentially takes a little bit of the edge off the healthcare system, though I'm not really concerned about the healthcare system's ability to manage that locally where we are, because I know the plans we have in place for our Staten Islanders. And I feel confident in that. But it is a safety measure that I think people really should more than ever consider doing. I'll also add, you know, in areas of the world right now that have already experienced their flu season on the other side of the globe, they did witness more mild flu seasons this year. And people are wearing things like masks. So it's interesting. I think that we might see some of that also. We might see the benefit of the lifestyle that we're leading now.
Yeah, which, I mean, like you had mentioned, Rick, that they're just better habits as a result, you know, and being able to say these are better practices and proven why washing hands is important and covering your mouth and maybe not going to work sick. But, you know, then seeing other parts of the world having lighter flu seasons and seeing cultures and communities actually wearing masks pre-pandemic and saying, okay, yeah, that does make sense now. I'm learning firsthand and seeing firsthand how important it is. I think walking away with better habits isn't necessarily a bad thing.
A lot of good lessons have been learned. Would I love for us not to all have to wear masks at some point? Absolutely. But I do think there have been some lessons learned that are beneficial in this moment.
Right, and speaking to lessons learned, right, we learned a lot of great ones. One thing we did learn, we learned and we saw during COVID was that the volume of your regular cases in the emergency department dipped. People were afraid to come to the hospital. What effect do you think that had on the community? And what can you say now to those listening?
And we know they were scared to come. And I think they're still scared to come to some extent. There have been surveys about this that have shown that the top couple of reasons why people have been avoiding care and avoiding emergency care in particular is the fear for contracting COVID in hospitals or other healthcare facilities. And though the regulations or our own policies around this have changed in the moment, while we have the luxury to, given the circumstance in our community, to not be able to be there with their loved ones, to not have visitors, which was a motivator for us to change the current visitation policies in the hospital and the emergency department, because we don't want that to keep people back from getting their care. People definitely experience things that will impact their health probably forever, right? So there will be someone, and we know there were a lot of someones who avoided coming when they had chest pain. And one of those patients could have had a heart attack. They could have lived through that at home. That might mean that forever their heart is weaker. It just doesn't pump blood as strongly as it used to. That puts them at risk for heart failure, which makes them chronically short of breath and makes their heart weaker as time goes on. Whereas if they'd come in when they were having the acute event, we could have prevented the downstream effects of that problem. And then they miss out on us diagnosing the things that led them to have a heart attack, for example. Do they know they have high cholesterol? Do they know they have high blood pressure? Do they know they have diabetes? And the opportunity to fix the underlying things that can then lead them to have more of the same or different problems that are also life-altering. And because they lived through the event, they feel okay about it, right? They don't know they had this necessary event, but the problems that it will lead to as they move forward could be really difficult for them. And it's hard to know. Now, we also know that there were more out-of-hospital deaths than we ever saw before, people simply dying at home for the fear of contracting COVID. And it's, for someone in my position, it's really hard because I know how to fix most of those problems. And we don't want anyone to be hurt out of fear, though I completely appreciate the fear. I wouldn't want to see that happen again, because I truly believe our healthcare system and coming to the hospital is safe. We know how to do this. We do. And I would encourage anyone who's concerned to come in. And I think, Rick, I was telling you this story a few days ago where I actually had a patient who came in who was having chest pain for a few days still, who thought their chest pain was COVID and was so convinced that they had COVID, and they were scared they had COVID. So they went to an urgent care center to get their COVID test, where the astute people working there did an EKG and found that they were having a heart attack and sent them over to the emergency department. But those stories are still happening. In the height of the pandemic for us, we saw patients come in who had hip fractures for weeks, a shoulder dislocation for 3 weeks we saw one day. People who had problems, people who had bleeding problems for 3 months. I once was one of my patients, and I was like, oh, like we could fix this, but no, it would have been easier. Yeah. And they suffered in that time at home, scared, where the fear that they weren't coming in for was appreciated to be more significant, but it shouldn't have been.
And that's where we'll pick up next time. In our final episode, we'll ask Dr. Berwald why she chose medicine as a profession and emergency medicine as a career. Healthwish wishes to thank our very special guest, Dr. Nicole Berwald, Chair of Emergency Medicine at Staten Island University Hospital. We're very interested in your health wish. Contact us at healthwish@northwell.edu. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.